My husband finally cut off his toxic mom and sister when they had the nerve to demand we give up our dream house for my jobless sister-in-law and her deadbeat gaming addict husband and their 6 kids. My in-laws have a very toxic relationship with my husband, and it is starting to affect my life. You see, while growing up, my husband used to be the golden child, and Mill was extremely close to him. Jacob has told me that because his dad used to be quite busy with work, his mother and he, my husband and his sister Sarah, have always been close, and I'm sure Mill loves both her children equally. However, I have noticed that Sarah seems to get more attention from my husband than she does from Mill. I'm sure Sil must have felt that growing up too, which is why my husband has always tried to fill the role by being a good older brother to her, and always being there for her. But the thing is that both Sil and Mill would sometimes behave so absurdly that it was hard to keep up with them. My in-laws, including Sarah, were so welcoming when we first started dating Jacob, who was still just a fresh college graduate at that time. They lived in the same house, and my husband had his own floor where he could have his own privacy and invite whoever he wanted. This is why he would sometimes invite me over to his place to spend the night with him. However, on several occasions during the morning, Sil would barge into our room while we were sleeping without knocking. Knocking on the door before entering a room is a great way to start the day. Sometimes we were not even properly dressed, but she would act like it was completely normal and start talking to Jacob about very random things. This was extremely weird for me as I was uncomfortable with her seeing me in my lingerie. I should have expected this, as Jacob lived with his family at that time. Is knocking on the door before entering a room really too much to ask? Sometimes siblings can be very close, but she and I didn't know each other that well when Jacob and I first started dating. I found it extremely disrespectful, so I talked to Jacob about it. I told him that I wouldn't be coming over unless he installed a lock on his door. He agreed, and wouldn't you know it, the next morning Sil tried to barge into the door. She was unsuccessful, but she started yelling at us about why we had the door locked. She jiggled the door and banged on it, asking her brother to let her in. Jacob finally let her in, and she stormed into the room, questioning why he had installed the lock in the first place. When she noticed me, she pointed at me and started yelling at him. I was shocked to hear how rude and disrespectful she sounded. Jacob told her that it was him who wanted to install the door lock, but Sil wasn't convinced. She angrily told him that they were siblings, and that they shouldn't have any secrets between them. Then Jacob told her that he didn't have any secrets and that he had installed the lock so that she wouldn't barge in while he and I were sleeping. This was a surprising revelation. Sil angrily turned her head towards me and yelled that this was all my fault and that I was coming in between her and her brother. This all seemed to be a bit too much for me since I am very non-confrontational, so I excused myself to go to the washroom. I could hear her continue to yell and Jacob trying to pacify her. When she was finally gone, he came in to comfort me. He was apologetic for her behavior and assured me that he would talk to her again so she would apologize to me as well. The next weekend when I came over, she apologized to me and gave me a very pathetic excuse that she needed to talk to Jacob very urgently about something. Hence she thought it would be okay for her to come in. Jacob firmly asked her not to, which was great because it meant she was willing to listen to him. "Don't disturb us again," she said, nodding meekly. Although this issue was solved, this wasn't her only weird behavior towards Jacob. If me and Jacob would disagree on something, even on small things like movies, and if Sil was around, she would start telling him how he should date someone who had similar tastes to him and that we were clearly wrong for each other. Jacob would shoot her a disapproving look, but she would just smirk. Another incident would be where she would ask me uncomfortable questions about my past, trying to dig into my life. Jacob and I had been honest about each other's past from the very beginning, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with his sister. Regardless of my feelings, she would ask me some pretty intense questions like, "Why did your ex break up with you? Were you not good enough for him?" Or say comments like, "My brother's past girlfriend was so much prettier than you." All of these questions and comments would be whenever she and I were left alone. I slowly started to suspect that I was determined not to play into her game and let her put me down. I kept my mouth shut at first, but when she kept taunting me, I finally had enough. I replied, "I like my ex-boyfriend's family more than Jacob's. My ex didn't have nosy, overbearing family members." Sil looked surprised, and this seemed to shut her up for a while. What I told her was basically true, even though it did. I have a unique relationship with my husband, When I first came into his life, Mill was no better than her. She would ignore me, but once she realized that Jacob and I were getting serious, she started behaving like I was trying to steal her son away from her. She would purposefully ignore me at dinner or during family functions and act like I didn't exist. Jacob sometimes noticed this and would try to talk to her about it, but she has never changed. Once even, she called me stuck up and spoiled. Guess what? My parents sent me to a private school, and she was a public school teacher. She even tried to talk Jake out of marrying me, and told him to keep looking for a better partner than me. Well, my husband didn't care about her opinion and proposed to me anyway. When Mill and Sil found out that he had proposed, they freaked out. Both of them called to tell me that perhaps this was a bad decision. Since Jacob won't listen to them, I should end the relationship and give him back the ring. I found it very weird and refused to tell them that they were crossing a line by asking me to do something like this when I loved Jacob and wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. When they realized that they couldn't convince me, Mill changed her tune and begrudgingly told me that I should strive to be the best wife for him and take care of him the way that she has taken care of him all these 4 years. I was a bit offended, but I tried to not take more offense to her words. Sarah, on the other hand, told me that I was clearly just a gold digger and that her brother deserves someone much more of his status. She even threatened that she would make sure to expose me before our marriage, so that Jacob would never marry me. After this conversation, I immediately talked to Jacob about everything. He was taken aback at how rude they were towards me. He fought with them over this, but both Mill and Sil, despite their objections, Jacob was determined to make me his wife. He encouraged me to ignore their opinions and told me he loved me unconditionally. While his words were comforting, I felt bad that his family wasn't supportive. Jacob and I had already decided to pay for our own wedding, so when Mill offered to pay for half of our expenses, we graciously declined. Jacob explained how hard we had worked to save money for this occasion. Unfortunately, this made Mill even more upset. Her spirits sank even further as she began to tell Jacob how sad she was that he didn't need her anymore. But Jacob's dad seemed very proud of us. Unlike his sister and mother, his dad was quite cool-headed and never had a problem with our relationship. As the wedding approached, things took an unexpected turn. The first incident was when Sil invited herself to have dinner with us, telling Jacob how much she missed him. By this time, Jacob and I were living on our own after our engagement, so we thought she genuinely wanted to spend time with her brother. We were happy to have her over for dinner. Jacob asked me clearly if I was okay with having dinner with her, and I agreed even though I was a little reluctant. After all, she was soon going to be my sister-in-law. We had a great time together, and it was so nice to have her around. Out of the blue, she started talking about how she absolutely detested cheating partners and cheaters were nothing but useless pieces of. We looked at her curiously, thinking where she was going with this, when Sil looked me square in the face and asked me how it felt to be a useless piece of. My brows furrowed in confusion, and then Sil began to yell, accusing me of having an affair with my coworker Zach. Jacob asked her what she meant by that, and Sil triumphantly began pulling out pictures of. I was so excited to show her the pictures. I already knew that I had never been unfaithful to Jacob since we started dating, so I was curious as well as to why she thought I was having an affair with my coworker. Looking through the pictures, they looked quite harmless. It's true Zach and I were close coworkers, but it's only because we had both started in the company at the same time and Zach and I were close coworkers who helped each other whenever we made any mistakes so that our boss didn't reprimand us later. Zach even had a girlfriend and Jacob knew about that. I don't have a lock on my phone and I had always been quite upfront with Jacob about all my coworkers. These casual moments captured in the photos were twisted by my imagination into something they were not. Evidence of an imaginary affair? Not in the slightest. In reality, it was far from her unfounded accusations. I felt a surge of. I was annoyed at her attempts to tarnish my integrity and strain my relationship with Jacob before I could speak to defend myself. Jacob, shocked and visibly upset, stepped in for me. He asked my S why she was following me around and taking pictures of me with my coworkers at various public places without anyone's consent. S, hearing this, started justifying that she only wanted to investigate me since I wasn't of their status, and she was afraid that I was marrying him to take away his money. Jacob was absolutely firm with S, saying that her claims were completely baseless, and that she was creating unnecessary drama out of nothing. He tried to reason with her, asking her to stop spreading lies and trying to harm our relationship. But S just kept yelling at him, saying that he should open his eyes to the obvious affair that was going on. I also tried to tell her that we were just co-workers, but she was completely unmoved by my words. The atmosphere grew tense as her accusations intensified. I was starting to feel pretty annoyed by her accusations, to be honest, and yelling, so I told Sil that I was going to file a police case against her for illegally taking my pictures and stalking me. Her expression turned petrified as she looked at me and asked if I was serious. I told her that I had all the evidence and she had purposefully stalked me and taken these photographs of me with my coworkers without my consent. She was trying to defame me with ridiculous lies, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This was all just to protect her brother, and she didn't think it was such a big deal. She started to beg Jacob to talk to me since she had done all this for him. She said that if I filed a case, it would hamper her work in her future. I told Sil that she could save herself if she wanted to. Sil asked me what it was that I wanted, and I told her that I was not going to file a case against her as long as she stayed far away from my life. At this point, Sil saw that there was no way out of this situation. She looked at her brother, but Jacob was on my side and told her that she should be grateful that I was willing to let this go since what she had done was clearly wrong. Estelle begrudgingly agreed to stay away from me, and since that day, she and I haven't talked. Jacob continues to have a relationship with her, but she has never dared to talk to me after that. Now there's the second incident that occurred before our wedding. The night before the wedding, during our rehearsal dinner, Mill, who had insisted on taking responsibility for the rehearsal dinner, declined our offer to help her in any way leading up to the event. She told us that she was going to take care of it. However, upon arrival, it became evident that the preparations were not as anticipated. The rehearsal dinner turned out to be a collection of plastic tablecloths on picnic tables and cold Mexican food. During dinner, she kept acting upset, which made the whole celebration even more exciting. She was a bit off her game, to say the least. She got drunk and started behaving inappropriately with the other guests, saying she couldn't wait for the wedding stuff to be over and how stressful it had been, even though she did not contribute financially or in any planning. Eventually, my fee got pissed also and escorted her out. My S tried to protest and tried to justify her mother's behavior, but my Phil refused to listen to her. As you can imagine, it was quite the scene. The next day was going to be just as special as the night before. Jacob and I had our first fight. I told him firmly that he needed to uninvite both S and Mill, since they were going to do something amazing to upstage us during the wedding. My husband was really excited and tried to assure me that Phil would be there, and he wouldn't let them get away. Then I had to tell Jacob that if he didn't invite his mother and my sister, there would be no wedding the next day. Jacob was visibly shocked by my demand, as I knew exactly how I sounded. But I was anxious thinking about what these women would be up to. I didn't want to be embarrassed again on my wedding day. Jacob clearly didn't have strong boundaries, but I hoped with this ultimatum, he would understand just how much they were starting to affect our relationship. Thankfully, Jacob did understand and made the right choice. He called his dad early in the morning and let him know that his mother and sister were uninvited. Phil didn't even seem surprised and assured him that he would make sure that Mill and Sil wouldn't show up uninvited. After a few moments of our conversation with Phil, Mill and Sil started calling Jacob continuously. They were trying to convince him to let them come to his wedding, but Jacob firmly told them that after how they behaved with me throughout our relationship, he didn't feel comfortable with them during the wedding. Hearing this, Mill started telling him how bad of a woman I was, coming in between him and his mother. Sil tried to reason with him as well, but Jacob stuck to his guns. I did feel bad that Phil couldn't come to our wedding because of his wife and sister. Believe me, I felt horrible for my ultimatum. But all my guilty feelings went down the drain when I later learned from some of Jacob's cousins that Sil and Mill had planned on. They told me how they all had a family WhatsApp group where there were only female members, and in this group, Sil had encouraged everyone to wear white. She said there was no reason for the bride to be the only one wearing white. I was shocked at how low they could just hurt me, but I was glad that they were uninvited. Jacob did miss his family, but he also understood where I was coming from. Overall, we had a great wedding, and no one tried to upstage us. I was thrilled to see that Mill and Sil had stopped talking to me completely. I was perfectly comfortable with it, and it made me very happy. They would only invite my husband over for dinner or on special occasions, which I didn't mind at all. Phil was kind to me and we stayed in touch over the years. Jacob and I saved our money carefully and eventually bought a new house this year. It is our very first home. And as you can imagine, we were very excited. At last, we had something big to celebrate. My parents and Sil came to visit for a small housewarming party. I was so excited to see them that I spent the day with my parents and family. Now let me tell you about the best part. Last month, out of the blue, she called me. I was so happy to hear from her after all this time. She asked me how I was and how my life was going. I was so surprised. I was a bit taken aback by her sudden interest, but I answered her questions anyway. Then she started asking how it felt to live in such a huge house when it was just me and Jacob. Her words stung a little because Jacob and I had been wanting to get pregnant for a long time, but due to some infertility issues I was unable to get pregnant. Jacob knew about this, and although we mourned that we might never be able to have children of our own, we had eventually accepted it. I had told Jacob several times when I was thrilled to find out that he was free to divorce me if he wanted to, so he could eventually marry someone else and have his own children. Jacob had always stuck by me. He loved me and told me that it was okay for us to be childless as long as we had each other. Of course, our families also knew about this, which is why Mill subtly commented about it. She then went on to inform me that my sister-in-law was pregnant. I was overjoyed to hear this. This was going to be her 6th child. I had heard from Jacob how jobless her husband was and didn't believe in using a condom, which would lead to these accidental pregnancies. Her partner was the epitome of laziness and did nothing around the house to help her or the kids. I have heard from Jacob that he treats us like his personal maid. He never even pays any bills around the house. S works multiple part-time jobs while he spends the whole day gaming. Despite all of this, everyone has talked with her, and guess what? Sil never breaks up with him. Then she went on to say that since Sil could no longer afford to keep working throughout her pregnancy, she thought it would be a great idea for us to give up our place since it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was blown away by her demand and struggled to form words. I asked her if she was joking with me, but Mill went on to say that she was in fact very serious and her husband deserves to live in a bigger house. But since she did not have space at her own house to let them move in, she had asked them to move in with us. I was so excited to have them move in. I found myself trying to compose her response amid the whirlwind of emotions that now enveloped me. I explained to her how this was our house, which we were still paying for. I was happy to have them move in, but I wanted to make sure they knew it was still our house and that we were still paying for it. My mother-in-law and sister were insistent, emphasizing that she had already talked with Jacob and he had agreed to this. It seemed a little unusual, as me and Jacob always shared everything with each other. I was sure that he would have definitely told me the news if he had agreed to let his sister and her family stay with us. I told Mill that since the house belonged to both me and Jacob, he couldn't give permission all on his own without my consent. Was a big deal. Nobody was allowed to live here with us without both of us agreeing to it. I told her that I would be happy to host S and her husband for a few days if that's what they wanted, but I wouldn't allow them to move in with me. Mill, on the other hand, started to yell at me. She said that making space for my sister-in-law and her husband was expected of me as a dutiful daughter-in-law. If I agreed to her demands, all our past issues would be forgiven. In anger, I replied, "Sure, I will be happy to let them have our place. But we are still paying for this place, and I know that if Sil and her husband move, they won't be helping us with the mortgage or the bills. So, I think you should take some responsibility and help pay for Sil, her husband, and her children to live in our house. I will be happy if you can pay just the mortgage. We can definitely cover the bills for everyone. I know you won't be able to pay the mortgage with just the one job you have, so tell me when you're getting a second job to pay off the debt." Hearing this, she erupted in a fit of rage, shouting and expressing her displeasure. She told me that it was ridiculous of me to ask her to pay the mortgage for us, and I retorted back that it was equally ridiculous for her to expect us to take care. She was so angry that S's family was going to move in. It made her even more upset, and she kept yelling while I just smiled and enjoyed it. She ended the call when she realized I wasn't going to give in to her demands. Not long after, my sister-in-law called, yelling at me for asking her mother to pay our mortgage. She kept saying how she always knew I was just a gold digger, so I told her that it was she who was being a gold digger. She tried to live with us, and if she ever wanted to see who the real gold digger was, She needed to look at her own partner who did nothing to help her out. This seemed to shut her up. I firmly told her that she could bicker with me all she wanted, but I was never allowing her family into our house unless they wanted to help us with our mortgage. She accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. The tables had turned and I felt relief. I was thrilled to stand up for myself and not back down. I was overjoyed to regain control of my home. I do feel a bit guilty thinking about my ex-husband, but I'm here on Reddit wondering if what I have done makes me in a hole. I'm so grateful to everyone who has shown their support. I'm excited to answer the most important question that everyone keeps asking. Why would Mill even demand such a ridiculous thing from us? It's because my Mill has always been this entitled, clearly. My husband and I have been caught up in this ridiculous charade for far too long. We need to sit down and have a serious talk about it. It's pathetic how Mill can lie about her own son just to get her own way. My son is just a pawn in her play, who goes along with whatever her mom wants because Mill has always favored my husband. Sil just listens to whatever her mom says in the hopes that Mill favors her as well. In this case, Sil stood to gain. From this situation, she could depend on us to pay for her bills and take care of her children while her husband would do nothing. I am excited for my husband to return from his business trip so we can talk. I don't want to discuss this over the phone with him since it's too important to wait. It's been 3 days since my last update, as I had mentioned earlier. I was excited for my husband to return when he did so we could finally. I told him about how his mother had called me demanding that we give up on our house for his sister and her family. Jacob was clearly taken aback hearing this, and I went on to tell him the entire story. He then confessed that he had no idea about all this, and that the only thing his mother had told him before he went on the trip was that his sister was pregnant. That's all he knew about the situation, and he had no idea that she would make such a bold move. I was blown away by his response. He told me he'd talked to Mill and sorted it out. I was really happy to hear that. He called Mill and asked her why she'd lied to me. I was so impressed that he'd caught her in the act. Mill tried to backtrack, saying she hadn't lied. She said she knew Jacob would be fine with his sister living with us, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. She asked me. Jacob stopped her mid-track and asked her why she assumed that he would have no problem with Sil and her entire family moving in. Mill told him that he and South were close, so obviously that would mean that he would have liked to help her out by allowing her family to move in. Hearing this, I closed my eyes in excitement, but I kept my mouth shut since Jacob needed to handle his mother. My husband then firmly told her that there was no way that he was letting her move in with him or take her job. Mill started yelling that she really needed someone at this point, but my husband told her that it wasn't our responsibility. He said that if she wanted to, she should take care of S and me. Then she began to say how Phil didn't want that and that their house was too small. But we were living in such a huge house so we could easily help out Sil. She even went on to say that since I was childless, I could help Sil's kids and this would make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in shock, but for the first time, I watched my husband's face change color. He yelled back at her that she had no right to say something so insensitive about me, and that she couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of S's children. He continued telling her that Phil rightfully didn't want anything to do with it. Since I'm childless anyway, I can help Sil's kids, and this will make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in shock, but for the first time, I watched my husband's face change color. He yelled back at her that she had no right to say something so insensitive about me, and that she couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of S's children. He continued telling her that Phil rightfully didn't want anything to do with her. With Sil, he was done with her. She had become like a child birthing machine. Mill tried to backtrack, but Jacob continued to yell at her that he had tried his best to have a good relationship with them even after they had continuously disrespected him. Mill started begging him, but Jacob told her that this was our house and I was his wife. He was firm but fair. Anyone who disrespected me disrespected him as well. You don't deserve to stay in his life, Jacob said, cutting the call. Since then, he's had no contact with both of them and Mill. Phil did call to talk to him, but after learning of the entire incident, he understood exactly why Jacob had taken such a drastic decision. Phil talked and apologized to me on behalf of his wife, but I told him that it wasn't his fault anyway. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. Lots of people suggested I install cameras around my place just in case. I ordered them online and installed them all around my place just in case Mil and Sil decided to show up and create a scene. Well, wouldn't you know it, they did decide to show up last weekend. They knocked on my door while I was all alone. When I saw that they were here, I called Jacob immediately. He said he was on his way. When I opened the door, there they were, Mil and Sil, looking furious. They demanded I let them in, but I stood my ground and refused to let them in, telling them that if they had anything to say, they could talk to me from outside. Mil started yelling about how heartless I was, accusing me of being greedy and selfish. I calmly told her that this was our home, and they had no right to barge in and act like uninvited guests. Mil continued her tirade, unaware of the cameras capturing every moment. I calmly reminded her of our previous conversation, reiterating that I would not be giving up my home for S and her husband, and that if she had anything further to talk about, she should wait for Jacob to come back home. S in turn started to yell that I was breaking up the family for no reason and that I was being too stubborn. She told me that not only was I a gold digger like she had always known, but now I was trying to take her brother away from them. I then informed them that whatever they were saying was being recorded in our cameras, and that I would be using this evidence to get a restraining order against them so next time they couldn't come 50 feet near our house. Their eyes widened in shock, and Mil yelled that I wouldn't dare to do that. I smirked at her and told her that if they didn't get out of our property this very minute, she would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and my S started to say how I was overreacting and that it wasn't. I was ready to get a restraining order against them so next time they couldn't come 50 feet near our house. Their eyes widened in shock, and Mil yelled that I wouldn't dare to do that. I smirked at her and told her that if they didn't get out of our property this very minute, she would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and my S started to say how I was overreacting and that it wasn't. Thankfully, Jacob arrived just then. He strolled over to us and asked Mil what she and Sil were doing there. Mil rushed to hug him, but he playfully deflected her and asked her again what she and Sil were doing there. Sil started to say that they knew I was trying to control his life by not letting him talk to us, and that they had come to confront me. I rolled my eyes at how absurd they both sounded. Jacob clarified to both of them that it was he the one who had made the decision to go no contact, and that he did not want anything to do with the both of them. Mil started to beg him at this point to forgive her, but he simply asked them to leave the property or he would have no choice but to call the police. Their eyes widened in shock. Clearly both of them had not expected this reaction from him. Jacob went on to tell them that if they ever showed up at our house again, then he and I would. They looked devastated, but Jacob didn't care anymore. I felt relieved that my husband was finally standing up for me. Eventually both of them left, still fuming. Since then, Jacob has talked with Phil, who was as shocked as us that Mil and Sil had gone behind his back to show up at our house unannounced. He assured us that we were right not to let them in. He is also becoming increasingly frustrated. I'm so happy that Jacob was so firm with them and kicked them out. I don't think they'll dare set foot on our property ever again. If they do, I'll contact a lawyer and send them a notice of immediate eviction. I'm so glad that my husband has finally realized how toxic his family is, and hopefully they won't trouble us anymore, so we can peacefully live our lives. I hope this is my last update since I want to move on from this situation as well.